WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by JW Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. Of course, you know, each and every week at 2:30 on Tuesdays, we come to you on Star Communications TV, Channel 16. Also simulcast on WCLN Radio here in the eastern part of North Carolina. The show is uploaded to social media platforms, so we never really know where it's going to end up. We're talking with someone today about something that we have heard a lot about. In fact, many of you are engaged in, and that's transitioning to or thinking about transitioning to electric vehicles, electric forms of energy that typically is non-traditional, such as solar, wind, other kinds of energy. We have as our guest today, Dr. Jonathan Lesser, the president of Continental Economics Incorporated. Dr. Lesser, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, JW. I appreciate being here.
I want to touch just briefly and highlight some of the things that you have done, some of the things that Continental Economics is involved in, and so folks will know a little bit of your background. First and foremost, you've been involved in economics and regulatory issues affecting energy in the United States, Canada, and Latin America, including gas, electric structure operations, cost-benefit analysis, mergers, acquisitions, allocations, rate design, assessment management, cost of capital, depreciation, risk management, incentive regulation, economic impact studies, and general regulatory policy. You're considered an expert testimony and reports in cases before utility commissions in various states and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Also before international regulators in Belize, Guatemala, Mexico, Puerto Rico, in commercial litigation cases, Arizona, Vermont, Washington State, and even before Congress and numerous state committees on energy policy and regulation. You've also served as an arbitrator in many cases involving disputes before regulators and regulated utilities, as well as disputes regarding the value of electric generated assets. Also, you designed economic models to value nuclear, fossil fuel, and renewable energy assets, as well as long-term power and presence of market regulatory and environmental. You've co-authored a number of books. A couple of those is Environmental Economics and Policy, Policies of Utility Corporate Finance, and the widely used textbook, third edition, called Regulatory Economics, published 2020, as well as numerous trade and policy issues. You're an adjunct fellow with the Manhattan Institute for Policy. That's a think tank for folks that maybe don't know what that is. They got a lot of very qualified people that I looked at on that website. We're going to be furnishing you folks today the website. You can go and pull up this information I'm looking at, look at some of the things that is being done, and also we'll give you the phone number you can reach out to Dr. Lesser with. With that said, and I could continue, we'd probably end up doing the first segment just on the introduction, but I want to kind of get into some of the pieces, if you will, of where we are. We are now here, and the folks that I talk to in rural North Carolina are looking at a message that's being sent to them that we're going to evolve into a totally different electric cycle that will involve their transportation, will involve the way energy is produced that goes to their home. And all this is done because there apparently is a scientific issue that says that we're on the brink of annihilation because we're going to be, I guess, overcarbonated, should I say, which just simply means that we're not going to be living in a truly green environment anymore. Help us understand from where you are as an economist and somebody that's looked at this issue, what you're seeing that needs to be adjusted to allow us to have more information to help us better understand what's going on.
Well, let's start with the policies are being designed to electrify the entire country. That's the goal. So that's you may have a gas furnace in your house or an oil furnace. They want to electrify that, replace it with electric heat pumps. Obviously, you just touched on electric vehicles. There's pressure for President Biden to ban the sale of gas-powered cars, diesel cars by 2035. Some states have already done that. New York is banning them by 2035. They're going to ban sale of larger trucks, especially the diesel trucks, by 2045. So it's and this is all supposed to help with reduce emissions, carbon emissions that are causing climate change. And part of that transition, obviously, is to change how electricity is produced. The vast majority of electricity in this country today is produced by natural gas and coal plants and nuclear. Wind and solar have increased because they've been so heavily subsidized for 40 years. Now there's a big push to develop offshore wind, primarily off the Atlantic coast. One of the reasons for that is because the opposition to putting on onshore wind and solar, especially in rural communities, is pretty fierce. And one of my former colleagues and a friend of mine named Robert Bryce has documented all the communities that are resisting these giant scale additions. And a lot of the states and those companies are fighting back. New York State, for example, has home rule. But a year ago, what the state legislature did is they passed a law overruling it. So these communities can't object to citing this stuff near them. And that takes away farmland. It wrecks their quality of life, wrecks their views. Wind has health impacts because of the low frequency noise. So and then some of these companies, they're just using all their legal talent to sue these towns. Basically, forcing these towns to spend money they don't have to fight it. So I think it's really about, there's two kinds of groups, I think, that are pushing this. One are the people who, they know this stuff isn't going to work. And I can explain later why it's not going to work. But they're making a heck of a lot of money from doing it. They're getting all these subsidies. When you mandate that someone buy your product, well, that's a nice way to earn a living. If I can mandate people using my consulting firm, I could charge even more for what I do. Wouldn't that be nice? So they're mandating it, and they're talking to the right people in government to get all these subsidies. And so it's really about the money. And I think Rush Limbaugh famously said, always follow the money. And that's true with all the renewable generation, all the subsidies. That's what's going on. A lot of these people know it's not going to work. Back in 2014, Warren Buffett, head of Berkshire Hathaway, and he's obviously no slouch, knows what he's doing. He said about his company building wind turbines, the only reason we do it is because of the tax credits. He said, there's no other reason to do it. I just do it to collect all the tax credits. So it's not economic at all. And when these folks, are looking at this stuff and they pretend it's economic, they just ignore a whole bunch of costs. And I'll talk about that too. Now, the second group, I call them the true believers. There is nothing, they just believe climate change is the biggest issue we face, period. No other issue comes close. And they think that any solution, anything we do to solve that, whether it's getting rid of free speech, whether it's destroying everything else we have to solve climate change, that's what they want. So it doesn't matter if you wreck the economy. Doesn't matter if if farmers can't afford diesel fuel anymore. If they can't afford fertilizer, that's made from, natural gas, petroleum products. They don't care. They are impervious to rational arguments. It's a religion. You cannot argue religion with people in general. There's no point. So those are the two groups that are really driving this stuff.
One of the things that interests me in your commentary is that those two arenas is really pushing this anomaly forward so rapidly. We're having trouble keeping up with it information wise. And I say that to bring this to point, and this is a report you did called Short Circuit, the High Cost of Electric Vehicle Subsidies. And I'll hold that up because actually I printed it out. So I like to read printed stuff. I read so much stuff on computers. Sometimes I like to print it out. But this report really, I think, gets to the heart of the electric vehicle issue. So when we come back from this break that we're fixing to take, I want to try to get you to kind of give us your thoughts on how that's moving forward, because I've heard folks that have been on news channels, especially representing major, as you just pointed out, vehicle companies. I won't start calling names, that say by 2030 even, they're not going to be producing any petroleum or carbon producing vehicles. Now, for somebody in our area, Dr. Lesser, that farms, we're talking tractors that consume diesel fuel. We're talking trucks that move products and food. We're talking just about everything that they've got makes it happen. So when we come back, I want to encourage folks to stay tuned, and we'll be back in a moment for the second segment. And I want you to kind of address that and help us understand what not only we need to know, but if you have some suggestions on what we need to be doing to help better educate those folks around us. Okay. We'll be back in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We Should Know is on there. We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Lesser, economist that knows a lot about the energy cycles that we're looking at in the chain. Back in a moment.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We Should Know is on the air. We're talking to a nationally and internationally noted individual that is very dialed into and has written books, has authored numerous articles and reports on energy in this country and multiple countries throughout the world, and particularly as it relates to the transitional, what I'm calling the transitional aspect of energy from fossil fuel or carbon to green energy, as we've been told to pronounce that as green energy, which is supposed to mean that it makes it much more friendly. He's editor and board member for Natural Gas and Electric. He has a BS degree in mathematics and economics from the University of New Mexico, a master's and PhD degrees in economics from the University of Washington, and he's adjunct lecturer, teacher, undergraduate and graduate classes at St. Martin's University, University of Vermont, and at the University of New Mexico. Dr. Lesser, it's a great pleasure to have you on today, and enjoyed the first segment. I want to move to the next segment and get back to this electric vehicle issue. We're seeing electric vehicles in some of our rural areas. The big conversation for most folks here is how does this work in that we do not have the infrastructure, and what is the cost added value for the person that is being moved from a petroleum-based vehicle to an electric vehicle. Your report that you did that I mentioned, but when we were going to break a while ago, goes into a great amount of detail. And again, we're going to publish or put your website up so folks can know how to get to it. But kind of help us understand that and educate us a bit on what we're looking at and why it is seems to be moving so rapidly forward.
Well, I think it's moving too fast. The policy push to force everyone into electric vehicles, and that's what it is moving far too fast faster than the technology. So now I think electric vehicles are a great technology. It's, to be able to accelerate 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or whatever Teslas can do. That's great. And my view is if people want to buy an electric vehicle, great, they should be able to do that. That's what the markets are all about. But that's not what's happening. We are subsidizing electric vehicles. The federal government has a subsidy on electric vehicles up to $7,500. They're trying to that right now ends after you sell 200,000, and they're trying to, of course, make that permanent. So everyone gets a subsidy. States are also adding on top of that subsidies. California has a $5,000 subsidy on top of that. A lot of states are doing that. Then they subsidize the charging infrastructure. President Biden has talked about building a nationwide charging infrastructure for $7.5 billion of taxpayer money. Now, whether that means that the electricity is that you stop on the highway and you get to charge your EV for free, I don't know. Some of the commercial ones that do that, where you stop at public charging stations, will charge you 50 cents a kilowatt hour. That adds up pretty quickly. They're also subsidizing, home solar, charging systems. So they subsidize the solar panels on your home, and then the charging system and the batteries for your home. And one of the problems I have with all this is it's unfair. Electric vehicles are being purchased primarily by wealthier Americans. People who have the money have their own homes, obviously have the money to install solar, electric, everything else. And so it's really an inequitable wealth transfer because there's also costs of not only are you subsidizing a high-cost electric vehicle, and they're about $10,000 more on average than a gas-powered vehicle. If people start buying electric vehicles, and a lot of them, in your neighborhood have them, then what you have to do is you have to upgrade the local distribution system. That's the poles and wires running down your street. Well, that's going to cost a lot of money. And the way the utilities charge that out is they spread those costs to all residential customers, including ones that don't have electric vehicles. So there's another inequity. So the technology is, what they're not proposing to allow electric vehicles to sort of come into the market on their own, like, gas-powered vehicles did a century ago. And, no one subsidized building gas stations all over the country. Instead, they want to force it. So they want, in addition to subsidies, lots of states, I don't know about North Carolina specifically, where you are mandating that sales of gas-powered vehicles and diesel-powered vehicles be stopped. So California is planning to do it 2035. So is New York State. Some are even talking about bans as soon as 2030. That's just 8 years from now. Mm-hmm. And primarily the market for electric vehicles is still a niche market. They account for about 2% of sales now, if that. And most of that, half of the electric vehicles in this country, about half, are sold in California now. And it doesn't make, for people who live in cities, it may make more sense. Where I live, I'm about 30 miles east of Albuquerque. There's no public transportation here. A lot of people have trucks, including me, to haul hay, haul animals. There are no, Ford's supposed to start selling an electric truck, but once you start hauling heavy loads, and it's in bad weather, like cold weather, EVs don't work very well. They get much less mileage. So, the technology really isn't there for people who don't have alternatives. And most electric vehicles today are not a primary vehicle, they're a secondary vehicle. So people, let's drive our EV, but we still have our gas-powered vehicle for those long trips. So, the technology is certainly interesting. It's improving, but let the market decide. If people want to buy them, great. But forcing people, especially people that don't have alternatives, what are you going to do when somebody can't buy a gas-powered vehicle and they can't afford an EV? The proponents claim prices are coming down. Well, last year Tesla raised prices 3 times, and it's already raised prices 3 times this year. And one of the reasons is that materials. The cars are made from steel. Well, prices for steel are going up because of supply shortages. Battery prices are actually increasing because of the increased demand for electric vehicles, batteries. Lithium prices have gone up by a factor of 10. So all the raw materials that are needed to manufacture batteries for EVs are going up in price. And there's been some recent studies, including by the International Energy Agency, and they're talking about there's not enough minerals in the world to meet all these requirements. So trying to move everyone to electric power, electric end uses, furnaces, water heaters, have them drive electric vehicles, and power it all with wind and solar power and battery storage backup. What these reports are saying is there simply aren't the actual reserves of the minerals needed to do this in the entire world. You can't do it. And the requirements are staggering. One electric vehicle battery uses about 10,000 pounds of raw materials. And that's something my Manhattan Institute colleague, Mark Mills, has studied a lot. Most of that mining is being done overseas. China, in the Congo, they mine cobalt. They use child labor and slave labor to do a lot of that. Amnesty International has talked about that. A lot of environmentalists in this country just want to ignore that. They ignore the environmental impacts because it's in someone else's backyard. So they claim this stuff's green. And most EVs are being charged with electricity generated from natural gas and coal. So it's not green. And in fact, as my Manhattan Institute report showed, you actually produce more emissions. It's just, yes, you remove them from the tailpipe and you just replace it. So it's, say, to the west of you from a power plant, which then, emits that stuff out and it blows over into your yard anyway. And it ignores the fact that a lot of the pollution from cars are particulates, and that comes from the tires and the roads. And even electric vehicles, as far as I know, still have tires and they still go on roads. So that pollution isn't going away. So it's really, the push for this is just, what people are mandating isn't going to happen. I do a lot of work with some folks in New Jersey, as an example, who want affordable energy. And the New Jersey issued this energy master plan in late 2019, and it calls for, actually, no, they have legislation. 330,000 electric vehicles must be on the road by 2025, and about 2 or 3 million by 2030. The total number now is about 30,000. So they get a long way to go. It's not going to happen. And so one of the questions is, okay, so 2025 rolls around, you don't have 330,000 electric vehicles. Let's say you have 100,000. Now what? What are you going to do? Because they don't have the infrastructure is not there to handle it. And, someone's got to pay for all this. And unfortunately, with electric vehicles, the someone who's going to pay for it are a lot of the people who can't afford it, can't afford the vehicles themselves.
We're going to take a quick break and we're going to come right back and continue this conversation about electric vehicles and then move on to wind and solar.
Okay.
At home or away, knowing who is at your door is priceless. Star Communications is here to help with its doorbell security camera by Skybell. Live viewing and two-way audio equips you with the ability to always see and greet anyone that shows up at your door. If this is the kind of confidence you are looking for, call Star Communications today at 1-800-706-6538 to learn more about this intelligent security that you can always depend on.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. We want to try to get back to our guests. We're talking about a very timely, very important conversation about alternative forms of energy, about green energy, about the movement to that. The windows and the road seems to be paved and wide open for us to go green. We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Lesser, an economist who's done considerable work, also as the president of Continental Economics Incorporated. And Continental provides expert economic services for a wide range of energy-related matters, including rate regulation, in-state, national, and international venues, regulatory and public policy analysis, commercial litigation, benefit analysis, economic impact studies, market and power analysis, valuation studies, market analysis, market design, and then it goes on. And to all these issues, they also provide rigorous and defensible and understandable economic analysis, a solid grounding in economics, finance, and regulatory law, in-depth research, and tremendous industry experience. Dr. Lesser, I don't know of anybody that knows as much about what we might be walking into or what we might be responsible for financially than somebody that has done the work you've done.
Well, thank you. I think there are people who know a lot more than me, but I'll try to help your viewers best I can.
Well, we are, as we mentioned earlier, we are typically a rural agricultural community, as I think the majority of the country is. As you pointed out, where you live, it fits in that category. Our folks are people that work hard. They're very smart. They run huge businesses. Some of our ag businesses easily in the multi-million-dollar range. They have huge amounts of equipment on the road, in the fields. And someone could say, well, they generate more carbon. Starting this segment, it appears, just from looking at it from a very lay point of view, that it's the majority of the people that are out here doing a lot of work that seem to be targeted to deal with the issue of carbon. Now, nobody's mentioned ships, airplanes, various other kinds of traffic that's happening all over the world that I believe generate more carbon than what a tractor will in a field.
Well, it's interesting that there are people calling for, green airplanes, green jets, which, that doesn't exist yet. There's some experimental ships that run on batteries. They can handle a couple of those containers, not go very far, not like a large ocean-going vessel. So the technology doesn't simply exist. And for your viewers to understand, a lot of this is, I think it's actually premised not so much on technology, but it's premised on controlling their lives. Just a few days ago, Samantha Powers, who was the UN ambassador under President Obama and is now an advisor to President Biden, was talking about high fertilizer prices. And as your viewers know better than me, fertilizer prices have gone through the roof. And she was saying, well, this is an opportunity to make farmers make the right choices. And by right choices, what she meant was stop using fertilizer, go all organic, just use manure from all the cows that they want to ban because cows belch methane. So again, it's about control. I find some of this stuff just staggering, that it's about, well, we're going to tell you how to run your life. And if you can't afford an electric vehicle and you live in a rural area, well, I guess you won't be able to go many places at all. And for a lot of these people, I think it doesn't matter. They, I live in what's called flyover country. I don't know if North Carolina is considered that too, but it certainly is here out in New Mexico. So the solutions just aren't realistic. If you've got a large, you can probably put, there are battery operated electric Caterpillar D9s out there. It's been tried, and weight isn't an issue. But the thing is, it's not practical because it's going to take a long time to recharge it. And so I would imagine if you're, trying to get your harvest in, you can't afford to have that combine just sitting there for hours and hours and hours while you recharge the batteries. That's just not going to work. So, plus what they're saying is by electrifying everything, you're going to increase the demand for electricity. So you're going to have to meet all this new electric demand. They're saying, well, we're going to do it, not only replace existing electric generating plants, we're going to increase it with wind and solar and batteries. And another thing they like to mention, and they've mentioned this in New York, is, well, wind and solar are variable. They're inherently variables. The wind doesn't always blow. And, at night, the sun has this really annoying tendency, it doesn't shine. So you've got to do something. Well, you need backup. So they're either talking batteries, or what they're talking about, say, on a day that the wind isn't blowing and maybe it's cloudy, so there's no solar. They want to bring in what's called dispatchable emissions-free generation. That's a big mouthful of words. And what it means is basically taking a gas-fired turbine and converting it to run on hydrogen. Well, there's one slight problem. There are no such things. There are no gas turbines now that can run on pure hydrogen. And then you have the problem of how do you produce the hydrogen? Well, today, the only cost-effective way to manufacture hydrogen is through natural gas. You reformulate the natural gas because it's hydrogen and carbon. So that's kind of silly, because you're essentially saying, well, we're gonna burn all this natural gas to produce hydrogen to run in what was a gas turbine. Makes no sense. Plus the costs of trying to store hydrogen and deal with it, pipe it, and hydrogen has a nasty tendency to explode like the Hindenburg. So it's just not going to work. And the only other way to produce hydrogen right now is something called electrolysis. And basically you run electricity through water, and that breaks up the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. But it's not cost effective, and there are no industrial scale plants that do this. So in New York, for example, they're saying, well, by 2040, we're going to need 10% of our backup generating capacity has to be these resources, but they don't exist. And trying to make policy based on, well, we're going to develop this new technology in time, that makes no sense, because technology, new technologies don't work that way. Getting something from a lab bench to, commercialize it and make it cost effective, that doesn't happen on a preordained schedule. You just never know. So with wind and solar power, I've studied offshore wind. People are talking about we're going to put thousands and thousands of megawatts of offshore wind. Well, even the amount that President Biden has as an executive order to put 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030 and 100,000 megawatts by 2050, that sounds like a lot. It's enough to power the United States for about 5 minutes, maybe. It's a drop in the bucket. The scale is gigantic. Plus, you then have to build all the transmission facilities to move that offshore electricity onshore. You have to have all the backup. You have to have all the distribution systems that can handle all the additional costs of running all this electricity. And there's all the costs associated with forcing people to switch out their gas furnace for an electric one and switch out their electric water heater for a gas one. All these costs, all the proponents are underestimating these costs. Let me give your viewers one example. State of New Jersey, part of their energy master plan, has said, well, the cost of putting in a heat pump, $4,000 instead of your gas furnace. It'll cost $4,000 more, and it'll pay for itself in a few years. Well, in Massachusetts, another firm did a survey of over 500 houses that actually put these in. The average cost wasn't $4,000; it was $25,000. Because a lot of times you have to back up, you have to redo the entire their main circuit panel, because it's not enough to handle all the electric load. And you need backup heat because heat pumps don't work very well in very cold weather. So, the proponents are just sort of sweeping all these physical realities under the carpet and ignoring them. And instead I talk about the energy fairy, because that's kind of what they're assuming it exists out there, that it'll just show up and they'll be able to have their lives, especially those in cities, and they can just live their lives the way they want. And they honestly don't care about people like your viewers. None of them do.
We're going to take another break. When we come back, I want to follow up a bit on the solar and the wind generated energy. But I did want to get you to comment on a report you did on nuclear. Is there a future for nuclear power in the United States? ? I thought that was an interesting report. I want to get your comments on that as well. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll be up for our last segment. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Dr. Jonathan Lesser. He is the president of economics here with Continental in the United States and other countries. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. If you joined us earlier, if you're just joining in, we're talking with Dr. Jonathan Lesser. He is the president of an economics organization called Continental Economics Incorporated. We're going to post the web address and contact information for his organization, because there's a lot of moving parts that we've talked about in the first three segments of the show. We're going to try to wrap up with hopefully some very helpful information to kind of help you to think through some of these processes here. You will find on the website that we're going to give you a lot of the papers and reports that Dr. Lesser has produced and presented that are fact-based documents. I think you will find those rewarding to read. If you only read the executive summaries, I think it will be beneficial to you. Dr. Lesser, I want to step into that world of offshore and solar. When I say offshore, I'm talking about the windmills. As you know, North Carolina is sitting on the Atlantic Ocean, and we are purportedly in line to have a number of windmills off the coast. I think as the last article I read, our governor was very supportive of that. And as you pointed out earlier, the cost-benefit analysis of that from the numbers you've looked at is just not what it's purported to be when the expectation it's pretty much like what we've seen with gasoline when we're using the gasoline stockpile that we have for emergencies in the country, and it lasts us about 2 weeks. It's a little bit disproportionate in understanding, and that's where you come in with analytics. I want to touch on that. The other thing I want you to touch on is a report you did called, "Is There a Future for Nuclear Power in the United States?" When I look at that report, it gives me pause in the sense that one of the true clean energies is nuclear, but yet we're not even considering that. Let's start with that conversation, and we'll try to get as much in as we can in this last segment.
All right. Well, let's start with nuclear. You're right. Nuclear is the absolutely clean form of generation. But and the Biden administration is kind of realizing that with some new proposals to subsidize nuclear plants that are losing money because they can't compete against subsidized wind and solar and wholesale power markets. The problem is nuclear has been regulated to death. And it's also, the industry is guilty somewhat because they made promises they couldn't keep. So one of the things, there's new technologies for nuclear, especially small modular plants that will hopefully be developed if they're not regulated to death. And, the NRC needs to move much more quickly on approvals. But the first establishment which is supposed to be put in by a company called NuScale, I think around 2030 now. It keeps getting pushed back. So yeah, nuclear is truly the only viable emissions-free technology out there that can actually meet electric demand in this country. So when environmentalists, and to their credit, some environmentalists have recognized we have to have nuclear power. But the ones who are dead set against nuclear, who think that we can meet the country's all electricity needs just with wind and solar, that's a fantasy. Not going to happen. It's physically impossible. They're living in fantasy land. Let me switch to offshore wind. Offshore wind is probably the most costly renewable technology that's out there. It is not cost effective. The costs, contrary to the claims of proponents, they're not going down. They're actually going up. And I have a report out that came out in February that talks about just the logistic issues and manufacturing issues. For example, wind turbines, they all use very large magnets because that's part of a generator. Well, there's only one manufacturer of those magnets in the United States. Actually, it's located in North Carolina. And it's, I think, U.S. Minerals, something. It was owned by Hitachi before. So that plant can't possibly produce enough magnets that are needed for wind turbines to meet the demand. Then you have a problem of you need these. We're talking 850-foot tall turbines. They require these gigantic ships to install them. They're like cranes. They're like offshore oil platforms, basically, to install them. Well, by the end of next year, there's supposed to be 6 of those ships in the entire world. The only one that can actually serve U.S. ports go from one U.S. port to another because of something called the Jones Act. And I won't bore readers or your viewers with what that is about. There's one. It's called the Charybdis, and it's supposed to be finished construction next year sometime. Then there's the cables. You've got to lay all this undersea cable to bring the power to land. Well, there's a shortage of cable, and there's only a few ships out there that can handle laying that kind of cable. So you have all these logistic issues. There's prices for concrete, steel, for the foundations. That's going up. Then you have the environmental issues. The fisheries people I've dealt with up in New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, they are very concerned that all these wind turbines are going to destroy Atlantic coast fisheries, which are some of the most productive fisheries in the entire country and in the entire world. And there's just a lot of the environmentalists are ignoring it. And I've asked people, researchers, what are the cumulative impacts, environmental impacts of building all this wind? And they say, we don't know. And so offshore wind is just, I call it an 18th century technology that was designed, to meet 21st century energy problems. I have an article in I think the current or just last issue of National Review that talks about it. If your viewers want to dig into that. So, and then solar. The problem with solar, the land footprint you require is just gigantic. And it's something called energy density. Nuclear power has the highest energy density of any kind of electric generator. Wind and solar have the lowest. Solar is not quite as bad as wind, but people talk about, well, I can put wind turbines on the ground and cows can graze underneath them and you can raise crops. Well, yeah, that's true somewhat. Solar, you can't grow any crops under solar panels. There's no sunlight. So that doesn't work, and you can't graze cattle there either. So, and again, this is all, where's all this going to go? It's going to go in rural areas where most of your viewers are. People in cities don't want this stuff. There's one offshore wind place in Massachusetts, Vineyard Wind, and the people who might see it, they're already fighting it. We don't want to see these because they're very wealthy, and they don't want to see offshore wind turbines. They want to just see nice ocean. Well, rural people probably don't want giant wind turbines either. So it's a real problem. There's a lot of disinformation being peddled. National Public Radio has a reporter who basically just denigrates rural people, saying, well, they don't know what's good for them. And when that's your argument, that's a pretty weak argument for a lot of this stuff. You don't know what's good for you. Well, I trust people a lot more to determine what's best for them. And if they, like I say, if they want to buy an electric vehicle because they think that's best for them, absolutely, that's wonderful. Do it. But you shouldn't be forcing your beliefs on everyone else. And that's what's really going on here. They're trying to transform our society in ways that are going to lower the standard of living, are going to lead to a lot more poverty, are going to wreck a lot of our agriculture. Some of your viewers may know about what happened in Sri Lanka. There was a big push by the government. We're going to go all organic farming. Sri Lanka used to export food. Now they're suffering mass starvation because agriculture production collapsed. But if you try telling that to people like Samantha Power, who's saying this is an opportunity to get farmers to make the right choices, they're not going to listen to you at all. And because, frankly, they don't care.
I think that's where we are today, is that we're looking at so many moving parts, and there's so many pieces to this that it's easy for us to dial in and not back up and do a segmented kind of review of what we're trying to do today is to get folks realistic, factual, data-driven information. And certainly you've done the research on that. We're kind of coming to the close of the show today, and I want to remind folks we're going to put up on the screen for you the website, Continental Economics Incorporated. Also, you can go to the Manhattan Institute. They can find your background information there as well. But as president of that organization called Continental Economics Incorporated, I think you've done great work. I want to kind of give you about 30 seconds here to close any comments you might have at the end, Dr. Lesser.
Well, I would tell your viewers that don't believe the hype and ask questions. Ask questions of your local officials, ask questions of utilities, find out who's paying for this, where's the money going, and how is it really going to work? And if you start asking those questions, you will find out that a lot of those people pushing this stuff don't have the answers.
I want to thank you for being with us, Dr. Lesser, and we look forward to hopefully having another conversation with you in the future. And as always, we kind of look at our viewers and our listeners here. We cover multiple counties in the eastern part of the state. we look at them each and every week and we say, may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host JW Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.